we're going to talk about demographics. Karl and I spend a lot of time talking and discussing about demographics because it interests us and because it's something that's quite easily predictable. Karl is an expert in demographics, and I am a wannabe expert. I like discussion, though, definitely with him. Karl, can you explain to us in a layman's terms what demographics are and why they matter?
They matter because it's about how society is going to develop, and especially how the numbers within the society are going to develop. Are we going to be more people? Are we going to be less people? Are we going to be, more old people and less young people? Who's going to pay the taxes? How long are we going to spend in retirement? All these kind of things. And as you said, the beauty of it is it's eerily predictable because, the number of 50-year-old people that we will have in 50 years is pretty much exactly the number of people being born today. And next year you're going to not be able to change that because these people are either born or not born. And it has an impact on how we should plan many things. The financial system, the tax system, and our own financial planning, of course.
Okay, so if we were to really say why demographics matters, I guess that the reason is because the number of people that aren't working need to be supported by the number of people that are working.
Correct. You have a life expectancy, maybe you live 80, 90 or 95 years. You're going to work maybe 35 or 40 years, and somehow the rest of those years you're still somebody's got to support you. You're going to pay for either for yourself or for the rest of society during your working years, and somebody, maybe yourself or somebody else, is going to pay for you when you're a kid and when you're old.
I think it's important to explain what has changed in the past century to give people an idea of what the impact has been so far and what the impact may be likely to be in the future.
Well, if you look at 1900, there was literally nobody, much less than 1% of the population that made it past the age of 65. So, number one, people live a lot longer, and there's fewer people dying. Number two, and that's something that really surprises a lot of people, the number of people being born is going down dramatically. A woman doesn't have 2.1 children or so, which would be required to keep the population constant, but actually almost half that. Now, with less people dying and less people being born, what actually happens is that the whole balance shifts towards a much older population. If people don't die, that means they grow older. If people don't get born, it means that we haven't got many young people. The part of society that depends on the working population is fundamentally shifted. While as a worker in 1900, you were supporting your children mostly, and supporting your parents or grandparents was a fraction of your burden. Now it's kind of the other way around. We don't feel that because the burden doesn't happen within the family, it happens within the tax system in the general redistributive environment. Plus, as you live past 70 or 80, actually your financial needs go up quite a lot, right? You need maybe support, you need medical care, you need a life support system that costs more than when you're 40, clearly. 90% of US healthcare spending is spent on people that have less than 6 months to live.
How much?
90.
90%?
Yes.
Staggering numbers, really. I'm blown away.
It's something, it's something I really we need to,
Staggering.
need to look at.
Right. So, what do we need to do? What needs to be done to keep the population stable in terms of either having increased childbirth or increased immigration? Take a typical country. Take Germany, for example, which has the oldest average population in the world, essentially. What would they have to do?
Actually, the worst is Japan, but Germany is pretty bad. It's the worst in Europe. What they would have to do is very, very difficult to do. You either need massive immigration or you need to raise the number of births per family, per woman, per man, whatever.
The first one's not going to work well.
The first one's politically very difficult, and the second one has been tried everywhere, and it's completely impossible because that's a very private decision how many kids you have, and states have tried to influence that in subtle ways, and it doesn't work. That means the number of taxpayers is either going up or down because of demographic changes. The number of pensioners who you have to support is either going up and down because of demographic changes. And now these changes are all together happening, each one of them in the wrong direction. In 2002,
we're talking about percentage terms for the benefit of
yes,
the viewers
in terms of
always.
percentage shifts,
Yes.
not absolute shifts,
Yes.
right? In 2002, the United Nations Population Division did a research on Europe and said, look, actually, to keep your population constant, just to stop it from shrinking, you would need, if you don't bring up birth rates, you would need to double the immigration, the rate of immigration. But to keep your working population constant, you would need to quadruple your immigration. And just to just remember, what that means is, if you don't keep the working population constant, but you only keep the population constant, your tax base, your revenue is actually going down.
So let's put context into this. Essentially, our Western model of living is based on the baby boom of the 60s and is really currently unsustainable at the moment.
What the baby boom means, and relative to where we are today, is that the baby boomers are actually the high value taxpayers. They are now in the age group centered around 55. Okay, so they are the real value creators. They're the high value taxpayers, and there are many of them. Right, the 45-year-olds. It's what in German we call it the pill dent. Okay, the pill came about, and
yes, really.
there's actually low birth rates in the late 60s. And that's going to hit us in the next 10 years, where basically the number of high-value taxpayers goes down very substantially, because that's when the pill came in. So you can see how things that happened many, many years ago have a certain inevitability in how things play themselves out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, okay, so to keep the revenue side constant, the UN said, well, you need 4 times as many. But to keep the overall tax balance, that is, relatively speaking, the number of taxpayers, workers, to the dependents constant, you would need 32 times as much immigration as you have, which actually would mean you need the whole of Canada immigrating into Europe every year. Clearly,
that's impossible.
It is impossible. It is. I mean, it's so far from possible. So what is the consequence is that the tax base is unsustainable. Right? The amount of spending,
the tax liability.
Well, the amount of spending we currently incur on both the number of dependents, that means children and elderly, and debt service, so interest payments and repayments of government debt, you cannot maintain where with the way the population is shifting.
Right. So that's pretty bleak, We can only assume one thing for the civilized world to retain its level of civilization. The only thing, since we can rule out increased childbirth, we can rule out, because anyway the governments want their cake and eat it. They want you to increase childbirth, but they want to increase the working population, and you can't possibly have everything at once. So that's out. The increased migration is certainly not going to go down well, and anyway the numbers that you've mentioned are totally way off the chart anyway. So if we are to believe that we as a society, as a civilization, can continue to enjoy the benefits that we've been enjoying so far without basically coming to an end, we have to believe that technology, there could be a technological innovation that is great enough to sustain a permanently lower working population.
Yeah, which means a permanently lower need to spend a substantial fraction of your life working.
Correct.
So what you need to do then is, if everybody lives 90 years and wants to work 35, they need to be extremely productive in those 35 years. But that means what you say, put a lot of robots next to them and they will be more productive, right? But it creates social problems, of course, and at least difficulties.
Well, how does it create social problems if they haven't been invented?
Well, if you
yet?
have, let's say, if it creates difficulties in countries where, let's say, there's very high unemployment. I mean, if you go to Spain or Greece today and say we all have to work longer, they go like, well, what do you mean? Half of our people aren't working anyway, right? The people in working age. So it's not. You cannot just simply increase the retirement age, right? That doesn't mean you have more jobs.
No,
right?
it doesn't, because the value of the jobs has to increase.
So
as well.
really is a case of how do we increase productivity. And I think so on the revenue side and on the cost side, I think Europe has been built culturally and politically on the idea that we socialize risk, right? That anything that can happen to an individual and that would amount to a bad stroke of luck kind of gets absorbed by society. And that's quite okay in my mind. We shouldn't really get away from that. But when the modern pension system got created, getting old was a stroke of bad luck because you didn't have the money to pay for it.
Yeah.
Right? That's what the idea of the pension was.
Yeah.
Now, getting old is not a stroke of bad luck. Everybody's getting old.
It was Bismarck, wasn't it?
Yes, it was Bismarck who introduced it, and only 2% of the German population ever got to enjoy it because nobody else got to that old age.
If I recall, he basically guaranteed the job for life. And half of them were falling, the 70, 80-year-olds were falling asleep on the job. And he said, well, we might as well pay them not to come.
2% of people made it into retirement age. Right?
Yeah.
So the thing is, we need to. It's the European, I think, ethics and philosophy that we socialize risk. But the things that you pretty much know will happen to you, like getting old and being retired, maybe you've got to start to think that society will be unable to absorb that cost, because I think the numbers don't lie. The society will be unable to absorb that cost, and that means you have to change your financial planning a little bit. You need to look at your savings ratio against the light not of today's pension payments, but the likely pension payments you're going to get from the government. The upshot of it all is that you're much more financially. Our age group, Nick, we need to be much more responsible for our own retirement planning, because society will not be able to absorb it. Europe already has a tax base which, in a global context, is as high as any, in terms of the amount of government presence in the overall economy. Government spending is such a large part of the economy that it rivals China basically, and there's not a joke, right?
Another staggering fact.
Yeah, and
second time.
Right, the private economy in China is relatively as big as the private economy in Europe.
Okay, so the news for government budgets is not very good.
No, I mean, on current tax rates and current spending commitments, what you know is that tax revenue will go down because the taxpayers are going down, and the tax spend and the government spend will go up because the people that we promise to spend it on are increasing in number.
Yes, right. So, what does that mean for the ordinary or for the general investor?
For the general investor,
how we've got to assume that the only way that society can tackle this is through technological innovation. There is no other way.
If the number of workers is going down and you want growth in the economy, you need a growth in productivity per worker. Right? That means increased automation, increased reliance on technology, whether that's information technology or actual physical, robotics and earth-moving equipment and whatnot.
Which in itself, by the way, will also contribute to a lower working population, because it takes longer to prepare someone to become part of the working population as well. The more complex it gets, the longer it takes for you to prepare.
That's a very good point, because actually, on top of that, one of the things that you can really do to protect yourself against these risks is to invest in your human capital. Because as we see these shifts, the value of a unit of labor to society is going up because the supply is going down. Right? Mm-hmm. So the return on your investment in your own education in the future will be much higher than it is today.
Interesting point. Well, actually, I did that myself, because I retooled a couple 4 or 5 years ago, at age 30. So there you are, I felt I was going to be obsolete, but in a way.
So you did something about it, and it's something that increasingly we see people do. It's sort of career changes, real retooling, retraining in the middle of their working lives. That never used to be the case. You had people with careers for lives.
Right. So one, that's good advice. Take care of yourself. Number one. Number two, what can we invest in? I said that technological innovation has to be the driver of that's going to plug the hole essentially. So how can we expose ourselves to take advantage of what we hope will happen?
First of all, the good news on investing in technology is the pace of technological change has only ever accelerated. Right? So, an investment in technology is, on average, has paid off. But the vast majority of technologies don't make it. So I think you have to be very, very careful not to try to pick and choose the technology that you believe will make it.
I was never suggesting that, not for a moment. So let's make that clear, please.
You need you need an almost passive investment and a very, very diversified exposure to technologies, because you never know who is the next Google, who is the next, Tesla, well, Tesla doesn't even make money yet, but
exactly.
Who is the next technology that really ends up making a lot of money? But
I can make a fair guess actually in that, and I can tell you that somehow it's probably the US government at some point, so which you cannot invest in directly.
You cannot, but I think if I had to pick one technology sector that I think will do really well is it's sustainable energy. Battery technology, solar panels, wind power,
battery
anything.
Technology. That's the one that, if they get it.
But don't pick one stock. I mean, as always.
Yes, please never pick one stock.
Good, make sure you know what you're doing. What else can we do? I think we can look at investing in real assets, because one of the dangers is that the governments, in order to deal with the situation, may one day have to devalue their currencies, maybe altogether. That means that the exchange rates, you won't feel it in the exchange rate, but you will feel it in the purchasing power of what's in your wallet.
Right.
And so the only way to protect yourself against that is to be somehow exposed to real assets that are in limited supply.
And forget bonds as a long-term.
Bonds are purely nominal investments, so that could be very dangerous in a scenario like that. Right. Essentially, what the government would do is bail itself out as a borrower, so the last thing you want to be is a lender.
Okay, I think we can close the topic here. It's been very interesting, and hope you've got something out of it. Thank you.
See you next time.